The battle of wizards and warriors continues with iron swords. The evil wizard Malkill will take the shape of the earth, wind, water, and fire. Farewell! The fate of the world is in your hands!
You're listening to the Piercing Wizard podcast, and I'm your host, Ryan Willett. I'm a professional body piercer with 20 years experience. I travel around the world teaching technique and safety classes, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Piercers. Listen in as I talk to my friends and colleagues about our industry so we can all stay sharp.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the Piercing Wizard podcast. I'm your host Lola Slider, and I'm here once again with Ryan Willett.
Hi.
We are going to be bringing you kind of a companion podcast to the last release where we discussed various lubricants that can be used or maybe shouldn't be used in the performing of body piercing. And this week we're going to be talking about a modern history of aftercare in body piercing. And we say a modern history because of course people have been caring for piercings as long as they've been getting pierced, which has been thousands and thousands of years. So this is really just the last few decades working through some of the logic and research behind some of those decisions that have taken place over the past 30 or 40 years. Before we get into that, we have the APP conference coming up, and we just wanted to give a quick shout out to the lovers of our merch. We have some awesome brand new merch designs coming with us to conference, and for Patreon followers or Patreon members of the Archmage tier, you can also come up to the booth at conference and get yourself an exclusive conference t-shirt as a thank you for being on the Archmage tier. Supplies are not limitless, so get there fast to make sure that you can claim your thank you shirt.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of merch this year. If you were a fan of Lola's previous Monsterverse designs, like the Modzilla shirt and the Dothra shirt, we have a new Monsterverse
We've
shirt
never done a
available for
Dothra
this
shirt.
year. We didn't do the, we didn't do the Dothra shirt. We did the sticker and the pins.
And the pin.
Well,
but yeah, we have a new shirt. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's real good.
Yeah, so if you're going to be in Vegas for conference, we'll start posting all the designs right at the start of the week. And Conference Expo opens up on Tuesday. So if you want a shot at one of those Patreon shirts, try to get in there early because they are pretty limited. But we will see you there with a whole bunch of different t-shirts and pins and stickers and all kinds of stuff. So we'll see you at the APP conference.
I'm just going to add in as well, because it can sometimes get a little bit hectic on the vendor floor sometimes during rush hours and that kind of thing between classes. When you come to the booth to get your Patreon shirt, what you want to have is your phone logged in to the Archmage tier membership that you have. Show us that, get your shirt. Just saves you a little bit of time standing at the booth. No one can ever remember their login or anything like that on the moment. So it's like, save yourself the stress and just pull it up before you get to the table if you like.
Yeah. I've got a little bit of new content for you at Patreon also. I just published a new video all about using a chamfer needle. If you're not familiar with a chamfer needle, think of a dermal punch, a biopsy punch, but a smaller scale, 18, 16, 14 gauge, 1 to 1.6 millimeter. It's got the same functionality as something like a dermal punch or a biopsy punch, but it removes a lot of the legal issues because it's a body piercing needle sold and designed as a body piercing needle rather than it being a medical device like a biopsy punch. So if you're interested in seeing that in action for helix piercing and like an anti-helix flat kind of an area, you can check out a new video I've got up at patreon.com/RyanPBA. So for the episode, I wanted to kind of talk about the history of modern body piercing aftercare. And like you said, we're not trying to say that like all aftercare before this or all aftercare that varies from this is wrong. This is really just through our lens of our personal experience as body piercers, and before that as body piercing fans. I started getting piercings in the mid-90s when I was a teenager, and the aftercare that was suggested then is super different from what aftercare is typically going to be today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the aftercare that might have kind of started in the 80s, been more popular in the 80s, give you some perspective of aftercare in the 90s and going forward. I think a lot of us are using something like sterile saline these days. At least that's probably one of the more mentioned aftercare products. But there were a lot of things that brought us to sterile saline. So I want to talk about some of the products that might have been suggested before. I also want to talk about their relation to the wound healing process, and different kinds of products can disrupt that in different ways. So I want to give a little bit of perspective as we go. Before we get into it, did you want to kind of hit on highlights of the wound healing process so people understand what we're talking about when something disrupts that?
Sure. So a lot of people envisage, maybe it's not a lot of people, maybe it's just my experience, but I think a lot of people envisage their piercing healing in a very specific way, just kind of like from the outside in or the inside out, and they don't really understand the different steps that are actively taking place. So the first step in wound healing is hemostasis, which is just a fancy word for clotting. So it literally means the wound stops bleeding. So hemostasis is the action of the wound clotting. So this can take place within seconds, minutes, hours, depending on the size and severity of the wound and the environmental factors surrounding it. Blood vessels constrict to limit blood loss, and platelets aggregate at the wound site to form a plug.
I really like this word fibrin. Like when you say like platelets, like clotting basically is platelets and fibrin. So fibrin kind of like holds all those platelets together at the opening of the wound, the break in the skin, and that's when a clot starts to form. And that's the very beginning of wound healing. As soon as your body is damaged, it wants to try to start healing itself immediately. So if you create a body piercing and there's any bleeding, when the bleeding stops, that can be considered the hemostasis part of wound healing.
Yeah, fibrin sounds like something you get in your Weetabix, doesn't it?
Yeah, fibrin.
Loaded with fibrin.
It's good for your colon. Next stage is inflammation. So that's when piercings are going to get red, they're going to get puffy. That's your body kind of rushing in all the materials that will further heal the wound. So, blood goes to the site. That's going to create a little bit of that puffiness, maybe a little bit of that redness, a little bit of that swelling. But you want to try to minimize that wherever you can. And one of the bigger ways to minimize inflammation is not introducing things that will inflame the skin and irritate the skin that's trying to heal that wound.
And inflammation can last from anything from a couple of days to a few weeks. Again, it depends on the size and nature and placement of the injury. I think it's always good to mention to clients in particular that inflammation is a normal part of healing. It's not a side effect. It's not cause for concern unless it goes beyond a certain point that you can discuss with them. Inflammation is normal and expected.
So next we have proliferation, and that's when your body is starting to form new tissue to heal a wound. So when we're talking about a body piercing, that's going to be a fistula. Your body's going to start producing new tissue basically around the jewelry, creates a little channel, which is the piercing, and that's called a fistula. So proliferation can take weeks to really start to form. But the next stage after proliferation is probably the longer part of piercing healing.
So the thing about proliferation that I think it's good to consider is that it's such an interesting part of wound healing because it can take weeks, it can take months for that process to conclude initially before you move on to the next stage, which we'll get to in a moment. But what's interesting to consider is that when you get something like a tattoo, it heals in days, a week to 2 weeks typically, because you're only damaging that top layer of skin. And the skin is just basically going back to how it was. It's restoring itself. Whereas when you get a piercing, you're asking your body to make skin somewhere there was no skin.
Not skin, but tissue.
Tissue, like skin's the wrong word, but I just think it's interesting because when people go, why isn't this healed? Why isn't this healed? I'm like, because you're asking your body to make new tissue where there wasn't any tissue inside your body. That's fabulously complicated.
Yeah, it's like,
and really interesting.
It's like digging a train tunnel or something. It's not going to happen overnight.
So anyway, during this process, collagen fibers are laid down by cells called fibroblasts. They provide structural foundation while epithelial cells migrate to cover the wound. So this is what what I would call initial healing. So you know how when you get a piercing done, maybe after a few months, you would say, oh, it's healed enough to change, but not leave empty.
Sure.
I always feel like that is kind of like that period of time where you move from stage 3 to stage 4.
Yeah, it won't close instantly. It might not bleed if you take the jewelry out, but it's not really something where you could leave it out overnight.
And it will close up over time if it doesn't get jewelry back in it because it hasn't reached maturation.
Mm-hmm. Well, the last stage of healing is maturation, and that's when that wound really matures. So sometimes it's also called the remodeling phase, but think of it, in terms of piercing. Maturation of a piercing would be the piercing is fully healed, fully established. There's no crusting, there's no swelling, there's no weeping. The jewelry can be changed, the piercing can be stretched, all those different things. So that would be maturation of the wound. So if you think about it in those terms, those 4 stages of healing, using the wrong kinds of aftercare could potentially disrupt any one of those phases. So we want to kind of talk about that as we get into it, if one of the products might be linked to one of those specific phases of healing. So I want to talk about kind of the 1980s. I know when we talk about the history of professional body piercing coming out of Gauntlet opening in the 70s, and then some kind of underground structure of body piercing for a few years or a few decades before that, professional body piercing really kind of like broke out in the 1980s. But I don't think a lot of things connected to body piercing, a lot of the ancillary stuff like jewelry and different kinds of supplies to perform the piercing, and certainly aftercare products, those really hadn't evolved yet. The body piercing industry was like, it was an interest, and people started to come together about this interest, but it took time for the industry to catch up about like, well, what are the different things that can be used to support body piercing? So I think a lot of the aftercare early in the 80s was all based around, well, what are the household products that you would have for like a scraped knee or a cut or a scratch? So you'd see people using things like, alcohol, peroxide, ointment, iodine, like things like that, because those are the things that you might have just had around in your house. And depending on the lineage of how a body piercer was trained, there could still be piercers today suggesting one or potentially all of those things because they were trained by someone who was trained by someone who was trained by someone who just said like, I've got alcohol around, I've got peroxide around. But I want to talk about some of the different reasons why I'm not going to suggest alcohol or similar things in my studio. So do you want to take any of these off the list and you can read one and then I'll read one?
Sure.
Well, I'm going to start with just alcohol because I think that's very, very common. So, rubbing alcohol, something that you might have around your house, when you put it on a cut, you put it on a scraped knee or something like that, it stings quite a bit. Alcohol is going to be an inflammatory agent, so it's going to make the skin red, inflamed. It's going to make it kind of like sting a little bit. But what it's doing is it's actually killing the cells of the germs that might be on your skin. So if you get a scraped knee and you have dirt, you have debris in it, those things are going to carry germs with them. So the alcohol can destroy the cell wall. So cytotoxic is a phrase that you brought up on the last episode when we were talking about things like lubricants and stuff like that. So alcohol is going to kill the cell. It's going to destroy the cell wall of the germs, of the pathogens, so that germ or pathogen can't potentially infect you at the point of your wound. So it can work perfectly fine for something superficial, but for a body piercing, if you're introducing that to the skin, it's going to make it red, it's going to make it inflamed, it's going to sting, and it's going to slow those early stages of the wound healing process because it's going to be damaging cells, including your healing cells.
Yeah, so like you were mentioning before about the advent of commercial body piercing in the West and that sort of thing, there was definitely, and it's kind of catching up a little bit now, but back then I would say like a sort of cart before the horse situation was in effect where people were trying to figure this stuff out retroactively because a lot of the early supplies they would use would be from vet companies, like from vet supply companies. So there would definitely not have been anything commercially researched or put out for sale that was for body piercing, because there was no market for that.
Yeah, this is also a time when even doctors, even dentists, they weren't even wearing gloves. They weren't even wearing disposable gloves. So, hopefully they were just washing their hands. So a lot of the other things that might have fallen into like surgical skin cleaners, all those things, those probably weren't even readily available to medical professionals at that time when we're talking about like the early 80s.
So this would be before my time, because
you weren't born yet.
I was born in 1990. But peroxide's something that I did hear recommended from kind of older body piercers when I was getting into piercing. In hindsight, what were things like moisture bumps would be suggested to use peroxide. So hydrogen peroxide delays wound healing because it can't distinguish between harmful bacteria and healthy tissue, similar to alcohol. When it's applied to a cut, its strong oxidizing power is highly cytotoxic, so that means it causes cells to die. It destroys delicate, healthy skin and immune cells like fibroblasts, which we mentioned during the discussion we had about the stages of wound healing. And they're necessary for tissue repair. It degrades the fibrin fibers required to form a healing scaffold that helps keep the wound together. So we're talking about a real mechanical impact happening here, where the wound is losing the ability to stay closed and form scar tissue. Really good for doing your hair though. That's the main thing.
I mean, yeah, peroxide is good. I would probably it's not the same chemical agent. It's not the same thing as alcohol, but I think they kind of go hand in hand. Alcohol and peroxide, I think, are equally irritating to a piercing. Once we get into a little bit of a discussion on mouthwashes, I definitely want to come back to alcohol and peroxide. But I also want to talk about ointments, because I think still today, I think lots of people out there are trying to put ointments, Neosporin, triple antibiotic ointments, stuff like that, because it's just so common when you get, again, a cut or a scrape at home. You maybe put a little bit of an ointment on it as a protective barrier, maybe fighting off some of the germs that might be on your skin. But when you're using that for a body piercing, and to go back to the last episode when we talked so much about puncture wounds in relation to lubricants, ointments occlude. So that means that air can't get to the wound. It's not water-based, so that means your body can't break it down. It's not intended for puncture wounds. Once you get that stuff into or onto a puncture wound, you get it onto body jewelry and it gets kind of pulled into the piercing, it can really irritate the site. And if you're overusing antibiotics in any sense, whether it's medication or something for washing your hands, or putting an antibiotic ointment on your body piercing, bacteria that's antibiotic resistant could potentially start to accumulate in that area, and it can make it actually a lot more difficult for your body to naturally fight that stuff away. You're kind of weakening your body's natural antibiotic resistance when you're using things like that. So ointments, again, are really just for superficial wounds, and they are never ever intended for puncture wounds.
And certainly not for long-term use.
No.
I think that's why it's so important to be familiar with what the stages of wound healing look like, because there are so many people who will get a piercing. The first couple of days it looks okay, and then they get a few days in and it starts getting red and they think, oh, it must be infected. Now, infection is possible, so I'm not going to say that it never happens, but in the majority of cases, a piercing being a little bit red, a little bit tender to the touch, secreting a little bit, are not necessarily indications of that. They could be indications it's healing completely normally. And I think that during this time period in particular, the attitude would just be kill it with fire. Anything wrong with it, kill it with fire.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important that every piercer should include a little bit of, these are the normal things you could expect. A little bit of swelling, maybe even a little bit of bleeding, maybe a little this or that, dry discharge, all those things. Because if you're not giving your clients those kinds of information, and they're just filling in the blank with a Google search, or if they don't know what they're looking at, they might panic and they might kind of mistake it for something other than typical signs of wound healing. So ointments can definitely disrupt that. Iodine I wanted to include in here. I don't think it's very commonly used for body piercing, but it's mentioned every now and then. It's just another one of those same things. It's what do you have around the house that can kill germs? So, okay, put that on your piercing. But iodine will definitely be far too harsh. If you're introducing it to broken skin, into a puncture wound, into a healing piercing, it's going to damage the cells that are trying to heal. Not in an exact way as alcohol or peroxide, but it will do similar kinds of irritation where it will prevent the wound from properly being able to heal on its own.
Before we move on from iodine, though, I have to digress. Can I digress?
A little bit.
So when I was a little kid, if you scraped your knee, you would get this god-awful bright orange stuff put on you, and it burned like fire. And for years, and then it just went away, like one of those weird things that kind of doesn't exist anymore because of, things being taken off the market or whatever. And I thought that it was iodine, and it wasn't that long ago that I learned that it's not iodine. It's called, so there's a version called mercurochrome, but that was the pain-free version we did, or mercurochrome. That was the pain-free version that we didn't get. What we got was called merthiolate, I think, or something like that. In fact, I'm sure I made a note of it. Hang on a second. Is it merthiolate? Yeah. Burned like fire and was taken off of the market because it had mercury in it as the one of the main ingredients. And it's like, it was just one of those weird memories that children now don't have to know what it's like to be in the playground and get the mercury disinfectant on their knees. It was so horrible.
That was in the US, and there was also colloidal silver, and all of those things have been removed from the market. They might potentially be able to be prescribed if a doctor finds it necessary, but they are no longer over-the-counter products because of their risk if misused.
So I don't think anyone out there is using mercury-based disinfectants for their piercings, but they could have been.
I think colloidal silver is that chemical where if you take too much of it, it can turn your skin blue.
Mm.
So I want to move on to the 1990s because that's really where body piercing had its boom and its explosion, and Aftercare had a boom and an explosion with it. All these different things. So basically anytime that the corporate world or just the world in general can smell money in the air, they want to try to create products to sell to new industries, new clientele, all these different things. So in the 90s, when you had that the boom from modern primitives and all the work being done by Fakir and Gauntlet and all these different people that were really putting a face on body piercing, it was getting popular, and then people needed stuff to clean their piercings with. So sometimes things were marketed more towards body piercing, but again, we kind of go back to what's in your medicine cabinet. And there was different stuff that was readily available in your medicine cabinet in the 90s compared to the 80s. You still had things like alcohol and peroxide, but there was a new product that was becoming more of a household thing, and that's, I'm going to just use the term Bactine, but it's really that chemical benzalkonium chloride, BZK. So it's a common antiseptic. It had been around since the 50s, but Bactine as a brand really started to gain popularity in the 1990s. Also in the 90s, you had the, I probably shouldn't say the name still, right?
Yeah,
okay.
You don't want to conjure it up.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not going to say the name, but you know what I'm talking about when I say the mall gun piercing chain. The mall gun piercing chain was doing a rapid, aggressive expansion in the 1990s. It was really everywhere, ubiquitous. Every mall in America had one of these chain stores that was offering gun piercing, and they needed a product to sell to people as the ear care solution. So a lot of us might be familiar with ear care solution. That might also be a common household product depending on the household that you grew up in. And ear care solution is essentially a BZK solution, a benzalkonium chloride solution. When it was first launched, it was basically just isopropyl alcohol, but that stung too much, especially when they were trying to sell it, market it towards children getting their ears pierced. So in the 90s, they started changing over the active ingredient from alcohol to benzalkonium chloride, BZK, and that's where that ear care solution that a lot of us might be familiar with comes from. Now that's the mall piercing chain kind of specific Aftercare product. But then there was sort of a counterpart that was readily available in drugstores and chemists, and it was called Bactine. And a lot of us might have had that for our scraped knees and our cuts and scratches. It had the benzalkonium chloride, which was an antiseptic, but it also had lidocaine, which could kind of soothe any irritation. So when you'd spray it on, when you'd squirt it on, when you would apply it to a wound, it would numb it, it would soothe it a little bit, and I think it's a really easy jump of logic for people to think like, oh, I could put this on my piercing, my irritated, my inflamed, my healing piercing. Why not use something like a BZK type solution on a piercing? So that's going to have its drawbacks, really similar to the other products, because it's got cytotoxicity. So that means it's disrupting the cell walls of microorganisms. Again, you have those microorganisms, those germs at the site of a piercing. And if you want to try to kill those germs before they can become disruptive to the body and create an infection, you're going to be doing that with a cytotoxic product. And that's killing the cell wall of the germs. But the cytotoxicity is also going to disrupt the healing cells of the body piercing. So when the body is trying to form those new cells to heal a wound, and you're constantly applying a benzalkonium chloride, a BZK solution to it, you're irritating those cells because you're breaking down the cell wall. So the cells that are trying to do the work of healing the piercing are being killed off, their growth is being slowed, and you might be replacing healthy tissue with more of a scar tissue because you're applying an irritating chemical to your wound. Did you have Bactine in the UK or something like it?
So there is Bactine in the UK now because tattooers use it, and I don't know if they've always used it or if it's something that started to become imported, but growing up it wasn't a medicine cabinet type thing that I had.
Okay. Well, I remember using it for all of my early body piercings when I was in my teens and my early 20s. That's something that I was even suggesting to my clientele when I started piercing, like started piercing, probably around like 1996, 1997. It was like, okay, yeah, you want to go over to the pharmacy and you want to grab a bottle of Bactine and some Q-tips. But what it's doing is it's basically stunting the growth of the necessary granulation tissue. So it's slowing down collagen deposition. So it can cause a little bit of irritation for that stage 1 or stage 2 of healing, but really where it's causing the biggest problem is during the proliferation phase, the wound healing, basically stage 3 of healing, when your body's trying to form the new tissue to create that healthy fistula, to create that healthy tissue. What you're getting instead is a more irritated kind of a tissue. It's more of a scar tissue. So your piercing can still heal, but it's not going to be quite as healthy during that healing because, again, you're introducing an irritating chemical to the healing process. Using something like a BZK can also cause an issue called contact dermatitis. Do you ever use that phrase when you talk to clientele? I really only use it when I'm talking to other piercers.
I'll tend to use the phrase contact irritation, just because it's a little bit less medical, doctory, and I think that like contact dermatitis is a diagnosed thing. So I think that I just try and steer away from using terminology that could come off as like diagnostic, for example, to clients. I wouldn't want to say, oh, you have contact dermatitis, but I will say this is causing contact irritation. Probably one of the most common times that it gets brought up is when I'm discussing with a client the healing issues they're having due to a failure of drying their piercing after like washing their hair, after showering, you know, like when people get irritation behind their earlobes and that kind of thing. And I'll usually say to them like, you know what it's like when you wash when you wash the dishes, but you've got a ring on your finger,
yeah,
and you do that, and then if you don't get the water out from under the ring and dry it, it gets really irritating. That's like contact irritation. The water is not harmful in itself, and the ring isn't harmful in itself, but having them rubbing against your skin, this is not comfortable. So, you know, just to try and get clients to be aware that even though the jewelry is great quality and the water that you're using may be high quality water, combining those things together can still cause issues for your skin. You can't just assume that it's never going to be a problem just because those two things are good quality.
Yeah, contact dermatitis, most of the time when I think about it or when I'm mentioning it with other piercers, it's in relation to hand washing. So like an easy way to think about it is if you're washing your hands with a really harsh soap, At the end of the day, your hands might be really chapped, really just kind of inflamed feeling. And that might be because the soap could be an irritant. If you're using something that's way too strong, like we're going to talk about Dial in relation to Aftercare coming up, but when Dial was like a really common hand soap, it could really easily cause something like contact dermatitis because the chemicals are just going to be irritating your skin. So contact dermatitis is basically either an irritant contact dermatitis, or it could potentially also be an allergy. Like if someone's sensitive to latex, putting on a latex glove can create contact dermatitis. But also if you're putting a chemical on the skin and that chemical is irritating your skin, that can be another form of contact dermatitis. So that's something you want to avoid with your aftercare products. And I'm not going to say that just one could be the culprit, but it can be a lot of different irritating chemicals, if just left on your skin, can create contact dermatitis. There's a product called Hibiclens, and I don't really think that many people are going to be suggesting that for aftercare these days, but in that probably like late 90s, early 2000s phase when people were really trying to kind of like one-up each other, Hibiclens, it's a really strong surgical antiseptic. So that's what a medical professional would use to prepare your skin before surgery. It's chlorhexidine gluconate, but it's a very high concentration. It's 4%. It might not seem that high, but when we're talking about a chemical like this, it's a very high concentration. 4% chlorhexidine gluconate can be used really successfully as a surgical skin prep, but it's really not intended for any level of open skin. Cuts and scratches and things like that at that concentration. It's way too irritating. I remember when I was piercing in the 90s and there was another like local guy that was piercing around here. He had a friend that he kind of fell out with and I knew the friend, and then the friend kind of came to me in like a gotcha moment. And he's like, I want to tell you what his secret is, his secret weapon for piercing. He's having people clean it with Hibiclens. And I was like, I have no idea what Hibiclens is. I'm not going to tell people to clean with Hibiclens. And I'm glad I didn't, because I think it's way too strong, completely inappropriate for body piercing aftercare.
So this kind of ties into what we spoke about on the last podcast, but I think this is another product that can be misunderstood because I've used Hibiclens in the past. I don't anymore. But the thing about a product like this, where it says it can be used for surgical prep, one of the ways that it can be used to prepare you for surgery is you can be told to shower with it at home, like wash your body with this product. So it's diluted and you're mixing it with water and creating suds and washing your body down. And the reason for that is because it prevents bacteria from multiplying. It has bacteriostatic properties. And then when you go in to get prepped for actual surgery, your bacterial load is then going to be smaller and there's going to be a reduction. Then they can disinfect your skin again and prep you for surgery. So it doesn't necessarily mean you should just pour a bucket of Hibiclens on yourself. It's something that people would shower with.
Yeah, but that's the really important distinction is it's intact skin and it's diluted. So when we're talking about the actual product of Hibiclens, like sold as a product to clean skin, it's entirely for intact skin. It's not even recommended to use it on mucosal tissue, mucous membrane tissue. Mucous membrane tissue, again, like inside of your eyelid, inside of your mouth, genital tissue, anal tissue, like that's mucous membrane, and it's partially permeable. So the body can absorb moisture, the body can absorb chemicals through that mucous membrane tissue. So that's one of the reasons why certain products are fine for external intact skin, but maybe not mucosa, not for puncture wounds, not for broken skin, things like that. But there are some products out there for aftercare, like in the UK, you have a chlorhexidine gluconate mouthwash. It's just a significantly lower concentration for that purpose.
So speaking of UK products that I didn't know were UK products, apparently it's big in South Africa as well.
South Africa.
South Africa is TCP antiseptic.
Are you going to try to say this word?
Trichlorophenomethylidosalicylate.
Sure.
Nailed it. So I feel like even when I say TCP, people from the UK listening will be like, they'll like suck in through their teeth because it fucking sucked. So like when I was a little girl, when I was 8 years old, I got my earlobes pierced, and that's what you got to clean it with. You'd go to the chemist, you'd get TCP, you would dip a cotton bud in it, and you would rub that onto the front and backs of your ears. And like, to this, it's still sold and used throughout the UK, and sometimes when I'm working with customers that haven't been pierced in a really long time, they'll be like, "Oh, so is it just TCP?" And I'm like, "No," but like, oh, the smell is it has such a specific smell and texture, and honest to God, I don't entirely know what it is, and I don't think it matters terribly. But one of the reasons I think that it was more popular and considered a step up from alcohol is that TCP contains glycerol, which is a humectant. So basically it like pulls liquid or causes the wound to retain liquid so it doesn't dry and crack the skin like alcohol does. So I can see that being like an advantage over that, but definitely not something that would be required to put on little girls' earlobes in hindsight.
No, am completely unfamiliar with this product because it's not a common product. I don't even know if it's available in the States. So I did a little bit of researching on it, and I still couldn't tell you what it is or how it works.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about this next product, I mean, maybe at length, because this was like a huge part of piercing aftercare for a large portion of my teen years and my 20s, and that's Dial soap. So I'm going to say Dial because that was probably like the market leader, but you know, antibacterial soaps are still available today. You can still get them in almost any store that carries hand soap. But the antibacterial hand soap, even the one sold as Dial today, is not at all the same soap that they were selling in the 90s and in the early 2000s. So the active ingredient in that classic orange Dial antibacterial soap was triclosan. And triclosan has been banned. So I remember kind of moving away from Dial and not really knowing why, but knowing that it wasn't great for piercings. You know, sometimes as piercers, we might kind of know the answer, but not understand the answer. I really liked when you brought that up in the last podcast episode. Lots of piercers, now and 10 years ago, 20 years ago, might have known that Dial wasn't great to use on piercings, but they didn't necessarily know why. And it's because of the triclosan, the active ingredient at the time. In 2016, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, actually banned the use of triclosan in antibacterial hand soaps because they did a study and it said that there was really no proven extra protection. You know, saying that it kills 99% of germs on your hands doesn't really matter when we're talking about hand washing soaps because you can also remove 99% of those germs from just the act of lathering your hands and then rinsing that lather away. That's something that we always talk about in the safe practices class. Proper hand washing is not really about using this intense, super strong soap that's killing all the germs and pathogens on your hands. Proper hand washing is lathering all the surfaces of your hands, moving that lather around so that it can encapsulate any of the germs, any of the oils, any of the debris that are on your hands, and then you're just rinsing that away with water. So including really harsh chemicals in those soaps, it wasn't proven to give any extra level of protection for just at-home hand washing. And it was actually showing to create antibiotic resistance. So routine daily exposure can encourage bacteria to adapt, and it's potentially contributing to widespread antibiotic resistance. So especially in a healthcare environment, when you had medical professionals, doctors, nurses, dentists, and they were washing their hands with this thing that was marketed as, this is a really good antibacterial soap to use, what they were doing is that they were potentially creating an antibiotic resistance on their hands. So that was causing its own problems. But also triclosan is a hormonal disruptor. So it's considered an endocrine disruptor, which means that daily prolonged use can negatively impact thyroid and reproductive hormones. So it's a really intense chemical, and it's not at all necessary for hand washing, and doubly not necessary for taking care of your piercing. Yes, you do have some germs at the site of the piercing, but a healthy immune system is going to eliminate a lot of those and just take care of the heavy lifting for work. What I want to be doing with my aftercare is helping to support the body's natural healing. So that doesn't mean introducing things that might create antibiotic resistance, things that are too harsh, things that are damaging the healthy skin cells. So I'm definitely not going to suggest Dial. Even in its modern form, even without triclosan, I still think that those antibacterial soaps are far too strong for healing a piercing. But triclosan, especially like that old classic orange dial, would be actively damaging to the body. The current ingredient is it's either BZK, the same active ingredient in Bactine for the foaming soaps, but for those gel soaps that you lather on your hands, it's something similar but a little bit different. That's benzalthonium chloride, BZT. So was dial like a big thing for Aftercare in the UK?
No.
Or any kind of like other antibacterial soap? Or was it just like pour some poison on it?
It's not a product that I'm familiar with in being used in the UK. Doesn't mean to say that it wasn't. It could just be that I'm not familiar with it. But peppermint Castile soap, we definitely have.
Yeah, so the next product that I want to talk about, peppermint Castile soap, and it was specifically the peppermint one. I remember they had like 5 or 6 different kinds. And the peppermint one, for whatever reason, was the one that was always brought up in relation to piercing aftercare. But you know, I'm not going to say that it's irritating in the same way as the triclosan and dial, but the peppermint in that peppermint Castile soap is an essential oil, which means it's a concentrated peppermint oil.
Peppermint Castile soap is, I think, still and has been routinely used as a tattoo skin prep. Like diluted peppermint soap would be used to prep the skin prior to tattooing, so that's how I'm most familiar with it. Honestly, for a product like this, I don't think that it's a terrible thing to shower with something like peppermint Castile soap when you're washing your whole body. But this is where it comes down to the difference between what you're imagining the customer doing and what they're actually doing. Are they squeezing some undiluted Castile soap out of the tube and just rubbing it onto their belly button or any other part of their body and leaving it there, or not rinsing it off? Or like, what are they doing? If you're just in the shower and you're using it like shower gel, it has brief contact with your skin and then it's thoroughly rinsed off. Yes, it could sting a little bit if it gets into a piercing. That does have the potential to irritate, but that's very different to someone just like putting this onto a bit of cotton and swabbing it on their piercing. And that might sound crazy to you or me, or you or I, but that's something that they could misinterpret and do. So I think you always have to look through the lens of how could this possibly be misinterpreted? Because to me it's obvious, but it's obvious to me because I know. So you have to put yourself in the position of someone who genuinely doesn't know and has never used this product before.
That's the thing, is like, I would be fine using some Dr. Bronner's peppermint Castile soap on my own piercings at home, but that's because I'm going to lather it on my hands, just generally lather the area and then rinse it away with water. I'm not going to be taking that soap, pouring it directly onto my piercing, rotating the jewelry to work that peppermint soap into my piercing, because that's really going to irritate your skin. That really concentrated essential oil. Yes, peppermint oil does have a general antiseptic quality, but again, we're going back to that concept of like the concentration is what's irritating. So if you're just putting like concentrated product of almost any kind on your piercing, it's probably going to irritate the delicate healing cells of the piercing. So I don't suggest the use, like the active use of any soaps to heal the piercing. If people want to use soap just for like hygiene in the shower and they lather a site and then they like thoroughly rinse the site, I don't have a problem with that. But like, I think that so many people jump from 1 to 100 so quickly. So when we talk about sea salt soaks, which we'll get to, I think the reason that those became problematic was because people were just thinking like, well, how about like a pound of salt with a couple of drops of water in it? It's really just the concept of like, how are you using it and the concentration, and more does not necessarily mean better. So, you know, that was kind of like the alternative to dial at kind of at its peak. I don't think it's talked about quite as much today, but I definitely remember selling it in my shop, suggesting it from time to time, and definitely selling it like once I was beyond the point of selling and recommending something like dial. For oral aftercare, I want to talk about Listerine. I'm going to talk about a short version of it. If anybody's ever come to my tongue piercing class or one of my oral piercing classes, I really talk about this one in a lot more depth as to like exactly what the problems can be and going forward. But like, Listerine is such a common product that I want to give people a little bit of like context with it. So it was invented in 1879, and that's just a few years after the American Civil War. So it was Invented by Dr. Joseph Lawrence and pharmacist Jordan Wheat Lambert. And the story that I like to tell, whether it's 100% accurate or not, it was developed after the U.S. Civil War as a disinfectant for field amputation tools. So a lot of people were getting amputations at that point. You know, like field surgery really wasn't anything like it might be today for the military. So if people were getting amputations with tools that weren't disinfected at all, a lot of times they were dying of infections and not necessarily the wound. So they started to try to develop antiseptics for those tools, and then Listerine was originally marketed as an antiseptic and to clean surgical wounds to prevent infection, but it was later promoted for things like floor cleaning and a lot of different stuff like cleaning like a surgical table and area, because it was so strong that, like, yes, it kills germs, but I want to talk about how it kills germs. The active ingredient, it's mostly alcohol, but it's also a mix of a few different essential oils. And again, going back to those essential oils, that means a concentrated oil from a plant. So you had eucalyptol, which is essential oil from the eucalyptus plant, menthol, which is essential oil from peppermint plants, methyl salicylate,
Salicylate.
Methyl salicylate, thank you.
Reading is hard.
It is. Methyl salicylate, that's wintergreen oil, and then thymol, which is thyme oil, the thyme plant. And those can definitely kill germs, but they can also really severely disrupt wound healing because, again, it's the concentration of the product. When you're talking specifically about using it as a mouthwash, though, like the big problem is when we talked about other products earlier where it can't distinguish between what's a germ and what's your healing cells in your body. Listerine as a product can't distinguish between resident bacteria and transient bacteria, the healthy bacteria that's already going to be in your mouth, keeping that transient bacteria under control, the things you might pick up from the world, the things you eat, touching your mouth with dirty hands, all those different things can bring in transient bacteria. So if the healthy resident bacteria is killed off and it can't keep those other bacterias in check, the transient bacterias, you can end up with basically like an opportunistic infection. You can end up with a fungal yeast infection called Candida albicans. If you have children, you might be familiar with the term thrush. Really common with youngsters. They get that white pasty tongue from basically a fungal yeast infection in the mouth. It can happen in relation to breastfeeding and from lots of other issues with just kids with dirty hands. Now, if you're using alcohol as your mouthwash and you're stripping away that healthy resident bacteria, you can easily create that Candida albicans yeast infection, that thrush. And I had that problem all the time in the 90s and in the early 2000s because I was suggesting Listerine, like most piercers were. They were saying, use Listerine. Some people were going as far as saying, like, anytime you put something in your mouth, any meal, any cigarette, even water, rinse with Listerine after. Way too much. It causes thrush. And then when people get that white, pasty, irritated, inflamed-looking tongue, they might start thinking like, oh, I have an infection. I should use more of this mouthwash. I'm not doing a good enough job. I want to use more of this mouthwash. And it creates this cyclical problem. So now in my tongue piercing, my oral piercing classes, and in my aftercare speech to people, I'm telling them to either just rinse with just water or rinse with a mouthwash that supports a healthy pH balance. And number one, an alcohol-free mouthwash. So there are all different kinds of, Listerine products, Scope products, all these different things now that are marketed as alcohol-free mouthwashes. You can have things like Biotine to maintain a healthy pH balance in the mouth and prevent things like thrush. So that's really what I would want people to be thinking about more in terms of oral aftercare. It's not trying to tell somebody to use this really harsh chemical and to use it all the time, because you don't want to disrupt the healthy resident bacteria in the mouth. So what was the main mouthwash for you in the UK? Was it Listerine or was it something else?
Initially, it was Listerine, alcohol-free Listerine. It would generally always be the alcohol-free version.
Did you always have an alcohol-free version? Because that was very late here for us.
You're a lot older than me.
Thank you for reminding me again.
You're much older than me. So as far as I can remember, it was the alcohol-free version. And then there's also chlorhexidine mouthwash.
What is it called again?
Corsadil.
Corsadil.
But that's just a brand name. There's like There's lots of different, I mean, you can buy like own brand that just says chlorhexidine mouthwash on it. That would be for skin prep, but we wouldn't necessarily suggest people use it as an aftercare. I've never really, side note, I have never been able to incorporate mouthwash into my life because I heard, and I'm not Googling it because that's cheating when it comes to general knowledge, I think. I've heard that you're not supposed to use mouthwash right after you've brushed your teeth. That's a thing. And I'm like, well, when the fuck am I meant to use it then? When am I right into the podcast and tell me? Because I don't know when the appropriate time of day to use mouthwash is.
I like how you say right into the podcast,
right
like we have
it.
a P.O. box.
So like, I don't know when the right time of day is, because what are you meant to do? Brush your teeth and then just hang about for an hour and then use mouthwash? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, when that original like brown horrible Listerine was available, that's what people were suggesting for Aftercare. And now that there are alcohol-free versions, great. There was kind of a bridge there where people were saying like cut your Listerine half with water, but it's still the same irritating chemicals, and I don't like having to dilute a product anyway. So I want to do a quick dishonorable mention for the 1990s Aftercare part of this, and I want to talk just a little bit about tea tree oil, because you still hear people talking about that all the time. When customers email or they come in for troubleshooting or checkups or something like that, and they have maybe a piercing bump, a lot of people on the internet are still talking about like, hey, you should put tea tree oil on it. Tea tree oil, when I was growing up, was always seen as something that you would use for like spots, for acne or something like that. That stuff is way too strong to use on a body piercing. Again, we're going back to it being a concentrated essential oil.
So something like tea tree oil, this is something that is always mixed with a carrier oil, what would be called a carrier oil. So like tea tree oil is intended to be mixed with something. There's almost no situation in which you would take essential tea tree oil from the glass vial or bottle that it typically comes in and just apply it to your skin. So it's something that you would mix with jojoba oil or coconut oil or something like that you can mix it with to dilute it. So there are diluting oils that it's meant to be used with, and I think that people, it kind of goes back to that thing that you were saying where people think, well, if that's good, then making it extra strong will be even better. It's right. It's the same logic. That's like getting antibiotics and deciding to take them all the same day to get superpowers. Like, it's just not, it doesn't work. I've tried it. No, I haven't. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So just going for the absolute strongest version of something you possibly can isn't necessarily going to result in better wound healing.
Yeah, because at that concentration, it can be caustic, meaning it can give you basically a chemical burn on the piercing. So if it was, maybe burning away a bump, I really don't think that that's something that I would feel comfortable trying to get a client to do. What I would rather them do is think about the cause of the bump and try to eliminate the cause. So probably my most common cause for a bump these days would be like makeup irritation on a nostril piercing, something like that. So rather than saying put this like really irritating essential oil on the bump to hopefully burn it away, that's probably not going to be quite as effective as just being aware that you don't want to put irritating chemicals on the piercing site in the first place. Avoid getting face wash directly on the site of the piercing. Avoid getting makeup or foundation or anything directly on the site of the piercing. And then maybe you won't have to worry about the bump. Or maybe if you can discontinue that makeup getting on the piercing, maybe the bump will just resolve itself and go away on its own. One more thing under the dishonorable mention from the 90s, because there is like a local story here. I won't bore you with the details, but a shop was basically shut down by the health department because they told a client to clean their piercing with Preparation H.
And it was not an anal piercing.
No, it was not an anal piercing. It was a navel piercing. I remember it because it was like one of those shop down the street kind of things. Somebody had an irritated navel piercing, and the piercer told them to put Preparation H on it because their thought process might have been, well, it's an antihistamine cream that can reduce itching in something like a hemorrhoid on your bunghole. But if you're putting it on a piercing, what you have to think about is, again, going back to those stages of wound healing. Stage 2 is the inflammation phase. The inflammation phase is also going to be part of the wound closing and healing so that your body can start to bring in its natural defenses to the area. And if you're putting an antihistamine cream on a piercing site, histamine is one of the chemicals in your body, one of the chemical receptors that tells your body to heal a wound. It's creating the inflammation to help heal that wound. So if you're putting an antihistamine on your healing piercing, you're kind of stopping the healing process and you're making yourself much more susceptible to bacterial infection, which is exactly what happened to a client. They ended up with a really nasty infection and then the health department shut that shop down. So no using Preparation H on your piercings, please.
So regarding Preparation H, I haven't tried Preparation H specifically, but I have used...
Where's this going?
I have used antihistamine creams for like really
like
reactive
bug bites,
tattoos in
itches.
the past.
Okay,
Like
yeah.
where you have a tattoo and it heals, so the skin is healed, but then you get like a latent allergy to the ink.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a good time with that in the past, like working really well. But did you know the beauty use for Preparation H?
No.
It's
Oh, is it for bags under the eyes?
yeah. So there's a joke in Miss Congeniality that I'm assuming everyone has seen, obviously, because why wouldn't you have seen Miss Congeniality, where Michael Caine gives Sandra Bullock some Preparation H, and she goes, "Do you really think they're going to be looking that closely?" But no, it's for bags under the eyes. Don't put Preparation H on your eyes and then try and sue me. I don't have any money.
Moving on. So after Dial, after those types of products, after Bactine, I think a lot of piercers were seeing the negative effects of those products. So they were decreasing things like Dial. They were decreasing things like Bactine. And what do you need as an alternative? So I think at the time, saline was available in some senses, but it was mostly for the medical industry. I don't think that sterile saline, saline of any kind was really readily available to just regular people in a grocery store, in a drugstore.
Sterile saline is still not readily available in the UK.
Yeah, like outside of the US, yeah, sterile saline is still not readily available in huge parts of the world. But in the US, we can get sterile saline basically everywhere that sells, home medical supplies, home wound care supplies. But in the early 2000s, just coming out of the 90s, that was not readily available. But I think some people understood that, like, okay, if you have certain kinds of surgical wounds, you're cleaning them with saline. We don't have access to saline in a store, so what's the closest thing we can do? And I think that's where sea salt solution came from. So I definitely remember probably in those BME years or maybe some of my early APP conferences when I was looking for something other than Dial and Bactine, sea salt solution was what a lot of piercers were using in those early 2000s. So sea salt solution is not exactly like a homemade saline, but that's what you're trying to kind of emulate, is like sort of a homemade saline solution. So the reason you're using sea salt, like when we call it sea salt solution, it's because we're trying to distinguish it from table salt. So the table salt that we use to season our food, that is sodium chloride, and that's typically mined. So that's dug up out of the ground, huge mineral deposits of sodium chloride, but it's a dirty mineral. So just like mining any other mineral, it needs to be refined. Sometimes it's going to be combined with other things because it's primarily, again, for seasoning food, for cooking. Sometimes it would have an anti-caking agent mixed into it to prevent clumping. It can have all different kinds of stuff in it. But a big thing about table salt is most of the table salt in the U.S. is also iodized, meaning it's got iodine in it. So there is a health condition called iodine deficiency. It's really common in inland areas, places that are nowhere near the seacoast, near the ocean. Ocean water, even just ocean air, can carry salt inland a huge amount of distance. So that can land in the soil and that can be incorporated into the food we eat, the water we drink, can have a natural iodine content. But in the United States, in like those landlocked inland states, they had a really iodine deficient soil. So people were developing goiters. It's a swollen thyroid gland in the neck. You could kind of have this like bullfrog looking neck. You can Google it, goiters. And the reason that you might not be familiar with goiters now, even though it was a very common thing, is because in the 1920s, the United States government saw it as a public health issue worthy of trying to figure out a solution. Their solution to this iodine deficiency causing a goiter was, why don't we try to incorporate iodine into the natural food supply somewhere? People need a little bit of iodine in their diet, but not a huge amount. So what can we put it in where they can kind of get that iodine as like a side benefit? And they decided table salt was the right product for it. So most of the table salt that you have at a restaurant or maybe even in your house, that sodium chloride table salt, is also going to have iodine in it. So if you're trying to mix a salt solution to take care of your body piercing and you're using table salt, you're probably getting a little bit of iodine in that wound. And again, we've already talked about how iodine is an irritating chemical for a healing puncture wound. So when we say sea salt solution, sea salt is evaporated seawater. So it's minimally processed. It's not dug out of the ground. It's not combined with a lot of other things. It's just natural minerals in salt water. The water is evaporated away, leaves the sea salt. And some people use that for cooking. Some people use that for creating a body piercing aftercare solution. So was that a thing for you when you started piercing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Piercers would routinely have bags of sea salt for sale that would be measured out in the appropriate quantity for the volume that it was to correspond with. And you would get a little bit of paper saying, you know, mix X amount of this with Y amount of that to get the appropriate strength. So that was still a very common thing. And
I did that for a long time. I sold little packets and I sold a wash bottle. So the things that I've kind of learned since the 2000s, when I was selling stuff to make your own sea salt solution, when I was recommending that for every single piercing, you know, probably a 5-year period at least, where I was telling everybody, you know, it's homemade sea salt solution, homemade sea salt solution. The issue is, well, there's two issues. So number one, some people get a little bit lazy and they don't want to mix out a small portion of salt with a small portion of water to clean their piercing once and then have to do it again and again and again. Some people would mix a whole gallon of sea salt solution and they would just leave it around, maybe at room temperature in a bottle or something like that. Room temperature salty water is the perfect environment to breed bacteria. So when you were doing that, you know, that mixture and you were just leaving it around for even just hours, but, you know, sometimes days, sometimes weeks of that same solution, basically you were just kind of pouring bacteria all over your piercing along with a little bit of salt and a little bit of water. So not ideal for somebody trying to heal a wound to be dumping a bunch of like bacteria juice onto it. Sometimes people would say, keep this in your fridge, and then you microwave a little portion of it, and then that can cause the exact problems that you might imagine in your head, you know.
so I feel that the issue with sea salt solution is not necessarily that it's bad or that it's harmful, but it's so lifestyle dependent. So for example, in the UK, people boil water constantly because they're constantly making cups of tea. And it's nothing to just make a cup of sea salt solution at the same time you're making a mug of tea. Whereas over here, that's not necessarily something the majority of the population is doing. Whereas in the UK, almost everyone is doing that in almost every household every day. Like, so there's quite a bit of a difference in just like the cultural habits of people. I used sea salt solution, like freshly made sea salt solution, a lot growing up, and I used it when I got my lip scalpeled, and found that it worked really well for me, and I wouldn't bother with it anymore. Now I prefer to use the sterile saline spray. But one of the best, I don't want to call it a sales strategy because that makes it sound like a little bit sneaky, but like one of the strongest methods of being able to get clients to buy sterile saline I've found
is telling them they don't have to do this anymore.
Well, it's asking them if they'll really do it, because a lot of the time they'll say, "Oh, I'll just make my own," and I'll be like, "Will you though?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, give me the saline." Like, it's happened so many times. It's more to do with people's habits and routines. For some people, making a fresh mug of sea salt solution might be an activity they enjoy, and taking 10 minutes out of the day to sit and do that that might be a nice time of day for them. It might be meditative for them. It might be something they like. But for the majority of people, they're just not going to bother doing it. And for those people, the sterile saline is super helpful and,
the convenience aspect.
Enormously beneficial in just getting them to that point where they're caring for their piercing, however you get there, you know?
So I don't think the act of using sea salt to mix a solution is bad. I think if people were measuring it properly, using it properly, mixing it every time, I don't think that's bad. And people are still doing that every day around the world because, like Lola mentioned, sterile saline is not readily available if you're outside of the US. It's not something where you can just buy it at every corner drugstore. It's really actually quite difficult for people to get outside of the United States. So sea salt solution, I would see that as perfectly adequate and perfectly fine. I think another problem, though, with the sea salt solution is the same kind of people who are going to make their day a little bit easier by just having a giant jug of this stuff and then like slowly doling it out. I think a lot of people who mix their own sea salt solution, you know, after a couple of days, they're not carefully measuring it out and having the proper mixture of it.
Right.
They're just eyeballing a little bit of salt. They're throwing in a little bit of water. Maybe they feel like, oh, maybe a little bit saltier is better because it'll dry out this thing or whatever. But
yeah, so it's so dependent on the person that when a client comes in and they're like, oh, I always make my own sea salt solution, is that okay? I'll usually just be honest with them and say, like, if you've had great success doing that and that's something that you're good at and you like to do, absolutely keep doing it. But if you're finding that you're skipping days and that you can't be arsed and that you don't have the energy to do this, like, that's what the sterile saline is perfect for. It's the routine and the convenience of just getting you to that point. And for most people, that's when they're like, do you know what, that would actually be better. So for me, it's less of an argument about the hygiene, although the sterile saline is undoubtedly more hygienic. It's more about just getting people to care for themselves in whatever way is going to fit into their schedule.
So this next part, I don't know if you want to jump into it a little bit, but I definitely want to jump into it at least a little bit. We talked about it a little bit on the last episode, and honestly, I don't think either of us really understood the answer, even though we knew the answer. We knew that isotonic was the right kind of solution to use, which would be 0.9% of solute level. And we mentioned that, but I think now we both have a little bit of a better understanding from Google University. So those issues that come up with people just eyeballing a little bit of salt, eyeballing a little bit of water, it's basically just salty water. It could be drastically saltier or less salty than the natural fluid in your body. So quick little kind of update about the definitions of isotonic. Is that something you want to hit or do you want me to hit it?
So hang on, when you say isotonic, you mean to say we're not talking about Gatorade?
We are not talking about Gatorade.
Because that explains a lot.
Yeah, it's got what piercings crave.
Yeah.
So isotonic means the same solute level as your blood plasma. That's 0.9%. So when an aftercare product is not isotonic, it's either hypertonic or hypotonic. Hypertonic meaning more salty, hypotonic meaning less salty. When it's not isotonic, it's disrupting the osmotic pressure of the cells. So think of the cells in your body and you have the cell membrane surrounding that cell. Now, if you have something that is saltier or less salty outside of that cell, you can either be drawing out the moisture from that cell, or you can be introducing too much moisture into that cell. So you can throw off the osmotic pressure of the cells in your body. So when you have something that's too salty, it can be disruptive to the skin. If you have something that's not salty enough, like if someone is only cleaning their piercing with, let's just say, water, or doing a soak with just water, that can throw off the solute levels in your skin cells because of osmotic pressure shifting the moisture in and out of that cell to kind of equalize the solute level in the surrounding solution, which could be your drastically improperly mixed homemade sea salt solution. So isotonic means that there is no fluid shift. So the fluid is going to stay in the cell will stay healthier. If we're also using something like an isotonic saline solution, that means that we're not trying to kill the cell wall. We're not preventing those cells from being able to multiply. So we're not damaging the healing process itself. We're not damaging the cells. We're just supporting healthy healing for the body.
Yeah, I think when people talk about like I want my piercing to heal. How can I make my piercing heal? It's important to shift their focus from what can I buy to rub on it to, what can I use that's going to promote my body's natural ability to heal itself. But more than that, outside of aftercare products, I try and get clients thinking about like taking a walk if they can, drinking lots of water, making sure they're getting some fruits and veggies, because an awful lot of the time when I get to chatting about clients that have chronic healing issues, there are lots of reasons that can go into that. They can't all be solved by going for a fucking walk. But a lot of the time you'll be talking to someone and you'll be like, so how are you taking care of yourself lately? How are things going? And you'll get to talking and they'll say, actually, things aren't going great. I've got this going on. I've got that going on. And it kind of helps them realize, like, I'm not taking care of myself. And I think if you really want to, like, air quotes, make yourself heal better, it kind of comes from the inside out, like it's everything that you're putting into your body to give it what it needs so that it can fulfill this function, which it will do for you,
Yeah.
So trying to get the attention away from what can I put on this to what can I do to help my body do the thing that it knows how to do is a strategy that I like to employ when it comes to aftercare troubleshooting with people.
Yeah. In all the aftercare and troubleshooting classes at the APP conference for years, they would always say something like, you can tell somebody to take a multivitamin and have a healthy diet. And now I think people are so freaked out at that concept of like, well, I don't want to give people medical advice. I don't want to tell somebody that they could take a Tylenol if their piercing is sore or something like that. I think it's that same kind of fear of like, well, I don't even want to tell anybody to take a multivitamin.
I think the other difficult aspect of it is you don't want to feel like you're accusing someone of not taking care of themselves. There's an accusatory tone that can sometimes come across. So I think it's something that I like to do when I'm working with clients, particularly clients I've seen a few times that are having recurring issues, where we'll just kind of chat and just make a little bit of space for that conversation to say, like, how are things really going? And I've had so many instances where a client's been like, you know what, I'm moving house, I'm prepping for an exam, I'm working double shifts, I'm doing this or that. And you're like, how are things going? Like, are you eating good? Are you making sure you're drinking lots of water? And they're like, nah, I'm treating my body like shit. And you kind of look at them and they're like, yeah, okay. It helps them understand that, like, you're not judging and you're not criticizing. It's just more that you're saying, like, take this energy and this anxiety and this focus you've got to heal and put it towards that. And it's going to do way more good than buying a mystery product off
and
Amazon.
Putting a bunch of stuff,
right,
gimmicks on it. Yeah.
Exactly.
So do you have a better grasp of isotonic now? Because I have a better grasp of it now.
I mean, I think that's exactly what I said.
Pretty much, yeah.
So,
water is the essence of wetness.
mm-hmm.
Like, it's like, the Goldilocks aftercare. Not too salty, not too not salty. It's isotonic. So something I want to just say too is, tap water is not bacteria static, so you don't want to have like homemade sea salt solutions just sitting around because it'll grow bacteria in it. So if you are doing that, mix at home sea salt solution, tell people that it's going to be like a per serving when you're mixing it.
And if you think you can get around not having sterile water by making sterile saline out of sterile water, don't do that either. Because when you have sterile water, it becomes contaminated
the second you
immediately
expose it to air.
So if you're thinking, oh, well, what if I use sterile water? It's not better, because then it doesn't have anything in it, again, to help prevent bacteria from just proliferating throughout the solution. So
yeah.
It will become contaminated faster than tap water, weirdly.
Right. And like, I don't want to say you're not supposed to be cleaning your piercing with tap water when you're in the shower, but that's running over your body. That's not, stagnant water, something just like sitting in a cup potentially for long periods of time. It's clean running water, rinsing your piercing, which is great. I think rinsing in the shower is probably one of the best possible ways you could clean your piercing.
Yeah.
As far as soaks, not soaks, like I'm fine with soaks. It's not what I tell people to do for their everyday general piercing cleaning. But I'm not like anti-soak or anything. I want to do a dishonorable mention though. If we're talking about sea salt solution, I also want to talk about Epsom salt. I don't know if Epsom salt was ever a thing for you in the UK, but it definitely was in the States. And I'm entirely convinced that it's just because people don't know what Epsom salt is. They just hear the word salt and think like, table salt, sea salt, Epsom salt, it's all the same. Epsom salt What it actually is, it's a mineral compound of magnesium sulfate. And it's most widely used as an oral laxative. You can drink it and it'll help you have a pretty quick movement. Or it's used as a bathing soak, bath salts. Epsom salt is a bath salt. And I think people just mistook it as like salt is salt. So what's the difference? Epsom salt should not ever be used to take care of a body piercing. Do you have any thoughts on that before we move on to the big ones?
It's not something that I'm familiar with being used to care for body piercings. I think in the UK it's widely accepted as, to be honest, it's something that's really just associated with like old ladies having a bath, which I now appreciate, as I absolutely bathe with Epsom salt occasionally. Yeah. So I am now the old lady. But no, it's in the UK, the Epsom salt thing is literally just something that you would find in your nana's medicine cabinet.
So when we're kind of moving out of that chapter, we moved away from the alcohol and peroxide kind of stuff. We moved away from the dial and Bactine kind of stuff. In the US, anyway, in North America, after the wave of sea salt solution came H2 Ocean. And like, if you notice, like, I'm not really mentioning a lot of product names on the show because I don't want to get yelled at by a distributor, by a company. But H2 Ocean, I really think deserves like kind of a special spotlight because to my knowledge, it was a huge leap forward in aftercare. And to my knowledge, it was really the first made for piercing, marketed as piercing aftercare that wasn't like that mall ear care solution type stuff. This was made for body piercings, not as like ear care solution. So I want to give a huge shout out to H2 Ocean. It was launched in 2001. And it was really one of the first bag in a can style products that I ever saw. Hairspray is basically just like the chemical and the propellant in one can, and you would spray everything out and you'd get that really chemical kind of smell. But H2 Ocean was the first like bag in a can kind of technology. So I did a little bit of research on it, and it's actually called bag on valve technology, BOV systems, and it works by completely separating the product from the propellant. The product, the H2 Ocean sea salt solution is in a sealed flexible pouch, and then there's compressed air around that sealed pouch in the can. So when you apply pressure, you're kind of releasing that product, which is pressurized from outside of a sealed bag. So the propellant and the product never come in contact. The product can remain sterile. You can spray it onto a piercing. It was super convenient. I sold thousands of those cans in my shop. I've since moved on to other brands and everything, but I want to make sure that people kind of appreciate a product like H2 Ocean and its impact it had on the body piercing industry. So you might have a different preference, for a product or a brand today, but H2 Ocean was a huge chapter going from what we were using and these other things that were for other stuff that we were adapting for piercing. The dial, the Bactine, the whatever else. And then this was the first thing that had this kind of level of credibility on it. Like, this is made for body piercing aftercare. I can sell it. I can feel confident with it. And I sold tons of those things. Did you ever have H2 Ocean in the UK?
I had it. I tried it myself. I had to get it online. Like, I had to order it. I think it shipped from America. I don't think that it was available to purchase in the UK at the time. Yeah, I tried it out. It wasn't something I ever sold, but it's like you say, I think people have kind of factions when it comes to aftercare. Yeah. If you're not with this team, you're with that team or with this thing. And like, it's fine to like what you like, but as you say, I think it's important to acknowledge innovation. Yeah. And recognize innovation. And okay, maybe if you don't love this product, that's fine. But because of this product, now we have this product and now we have this thing. And, it is important, I think, to acknowledge those steps in that sort of lineage of modern piercing aftercare.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the products that people have now, I don't think that we would have had them in the same way or maybe had them as quickly if it wasn't for the innovations from H2 Ocean. So, shout out to H2 Ocean for that. As far as that was this huge break because it was like, okay, it's got this convenience factor. You don't have to mix stuff anymore. You can clean it. It's consistent. You can throw it in your bag for the day, whatever. It's great. And that was really where the practices of aftercare, like how you cleaned your piercing, also changed quite a bit. There is that whole concept of like litha. Is that how you would pronounce it? Litha?
Litha?
Litha. Leave it the hell alone is also a really popular kind of sect of body piercing aftercare. It's like you just leave it alone. Maybe you rinse it in the shower, but we're not talking about doing physical things to it. We're not talking about soaking it. Maybe not talking about things like swabbing it or whatever. And then a product like this was really great to support the kind of litha type aftercare method where it's like, well, you can just spray this product. It's a sterile, purified sea salt spray. So H2 Ocean, they were a sea salt spray. And I think that's because at the time, sea salt solution was really popular and they kind of used it as like, their gimmick and their branding and all that stuff, but it was a sterile, purified sea salt spray. Then, if we flash forward a few years and you have, any successful product, you're always going to have a competitor to that product. So when you had the sterile sea salt spray product, you had somebody come along that wanted to compete with it and they wanted to make themselves a little bit different and distinguishable from that product. So that's when you started to get sprayable saline. You started to get sterile saline. Now, saline is not made with a sea salt solution. It's made with a sodium chloride, but it's not made with the same sodium chloride as table salt. It's more of a laboratory-derived sodium chloride, so it's very clean. Saline is typically made for medical wound washing. It's made to a very high standard for the medical industry. It's a very pure product, so you'd have sodium chloride and water in that isotonic solution, that 0.9% solution. But it was a very similar technology. It was that bag-in-a-can technology. It was just a slightly different product inside the bag, inside the can. And, I'll also mention, I'd say, some of the market leaders for the saline. So you had Neilmed Pharmaceuticals. Lots of people have Neilmed products available in their local pharmacies, chemists, druggists. Like you would have saline for all different purposes, neti pots for rinsing out your sinuses and all different things. You'd have a wound wash for surgical wound irrigation. And then they kind of branched off and they created a body piercing aftercare division. Neilmed, very successful. That brand is still going today, along with H2 Ocean, supporting the body art industries. You had other brands coming along and coming out with sterile saline piercing aftercare like Steriwash and a handful of others. But it's all fairly similar as far as what's in the can. So it's a sodium chloride, isotonic, sterile saline with that bag-in-a-can technology. And I think that that's really about as far as body piercing aftercare has gotten now. I think lots of people are using that as their go-to aftercare product. And it might be one of those things where you might know the answer, but might not understand the answer. And I just kind of want people to know what got us to that sterile saline in a can kind of generation that I think we're in right now. Do you feel like that's kind of accurate with that like chronology?
Yeah, I feel like there's already a generation of piercers that think it's ridiculous that you would ever use anything else because they weren't there for that time period.
Right.
But, mainly Neilmed is what I'll carry now because it's accessible in the UK now. But before then it was Stericleanse, and I think Stericleanse is also available in the US, is it not?
I'm not familiar with Stericleanse. I'm familiar with Steriwash.
Steriwash. Oh, I think that's a different company.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still sterile saline. But the thing about Stericleanse is you would buy it and they would send it with two separate, what are they called?
Tips.
The bit that you press on,
Yeah.
the button.
Tips, yeah.
The tips. They would send the box of Stericleanse.
Oh, it'd have like a mist and a stream?
And they would send you a bag of different tops so that you could go on and change them if you wanted.
Yeah.
Because the original jet stream version, you could fucking knock a nail into a wall with that thing.
Yeah.
Like we would have to be like, just use it on your hand first before putting it on your piercing because it would blast your fucking ear off your head.
The technology of the can and the spray tip can vary quite a lot from one company to the other, but you have to realize that like medical application, like at-home wound wound irrigation, scraped knees, surgical sites, stuff like that, that's going to outweigh the body piercing market by like orders of magnitude. So most of the saline that you'll have access to in a drugstore is going to have a tip that's probably for wound irrigation rather than a misting tip.
Like flushing.
Flushing, yeah, wound flushing, wound irrigation. So sometimes those can be a little uncomfortable. They're uncomfortably strong sometimes to use on a sensitive body piercing. So those brands that came out with like more gentle misting tips, really beneficial to the application of the product, because you don't want something to be a super like effective product and a super convenient product, but have it be uncomfortable to apply. So I think that the technology, the bag in a can technology, and especially those misting tips, I think has made an enormous impact on the body piercing industry.
Hi.
So that's kind of where I want to start wrapping it up. Like, do you feel like we left anything out?
The only thing I would add is that I know that there are a lot of piercers who are anti-soak now, and I'm not like soak as standard. You know, I'm not like do a soak every day. I like to use sterile saline mist for healing piercings, but I will say that there's definitely a benefit to soaking from the perspective of jewelry complexity, because, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, the majority of initial piercings were still being done with balls. And a ball, as simple as it is great for wound healing because...
But there's nowhere for like bacteria to harbor.
There's really nowhere for secretions to accumulate. Lots of air can get to the wound site. So boring as simple as they may be, they work really well. That's why they exist. Whereas now we're putting fucking tiny chandeliers on people with like 20 little tiny individual diamonds.
That's
and
when you need
prongs
those power
and...
wash jet streams for saline.
You know, I think that it does come down to like really understanding the products you're using, the products you're selling, the effect that they have, and recognizing that the aftercare for a complex ornamental piece of jewelry may be different and possibly should be different for a plain ball, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not something that I want to go down whole on, but I think it's important to understand those differences so that you can best serve your clients and meet their needs properly instead of having a completely flat one size fits all.
Yeah.
I mean, have your template, have your aftercare instructions that everyone gets, but I like being able to say to people, you know, this is what I would do for this specific thing or that specific thing. I think those little touches are things that people appreciate.
Yeah, I don't want to go down a hole either because we did a whole episode. If you're interested, you can go back in the archive. There's an episode called Aftercare is Puzzling. Sadly, it has terrible audio quality because we recorded it while we were doing a puzzle. But we talk all about like our opinions on like spray versus soak versus compress versus whatever. I'm not telling people to soak brand new piercings. I'm telling them either saline or a thorough rinse when you're showering. But you know, I'm also not anti-soak. I think they have their place in body piercing, and maybe it's not for your everyday cleaning, but I don't think like somebody soaking a piercing is gonna kill them. So, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed the brief history of body piercing aftercare. If we left out a product, sorry. We're going to be at the APP conference, so if you want, come and say hi to us at the expo. Maybe come check out our classes. We're both teaching quite a few, and we'll just be there the whole time kind of vibing out. So come up and say hi. We are not scary people. We're very nice, and we walk around with a lot of swag on us, stickers and pins and ribbons. So maybe come up and say hi if you want to get one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Don't tell me I look tired at conference.
Don't tell anybody they look tired.
It's so rude. It's so rude. And I'll tell you why. And you can cut it off whenever you want. Here's the thing. If someone looks tired, there's two reasons for that. Either that's just their face, in which case fuck off, or they are actually tired, in which case fuck off. There's no scenario in which you should say that to someone, and it can possibly lead to anything good.
Yeah, so nobody is going to take you look tired as a positive. They're always going to feel self-conscious if you say it. So how about you can just remind them to hydrate instead. Have you had enough water today? Is going to be much more polite than you look like you haven't slept in a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see you in Vegas or not, whatever. And we'll be back for more episodes soon. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
For more information about the show, visit piercingwizardpodcast.com or like Piercing Wizard Podcast on Facebook. For more info about your host, visit precisionbodyarts.com or search Ryan PBA on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. If you enjoy the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcast, and Google Play. Music by Benny B. Blanco. Show copyright 2017, Precision Body Arts LLC, all rights reserved.